Let's talk about savings in retirement. One thing as a financial advisor I do is a lot of retirement planning with individuals, and typically a lot of the intensive planning happens 3 to 5 years out because then you're starting to zero in on the goal, and there's certain sequence of events that need to start happening 3 to 5 years out from retirement that make sure that the person is going to land this successfully and give this person a successful pathway into the on ramp of retirement. And one thing that I like to talk about in retirement are savings. And I've had a few clients who just assumed that they didn't need to have savings in retirement. I don't know why. But you have to think about it this way. Let's say you retire at 65, you're going to live another 25 years until age 90. You have to be able to handle life and all emergencies and contingencies that happen in life over a 25-year period of time. That includes leaky roofs, cars that go out, hot water heaters that die, buying a new mattress, getting dental work done, getting new pairs of eyeglasses, all the things that have happened to you while you were working, plus some, because now you're probably going to start experiencing medical issues due to aging, and that money has to come out of somewhere. And I think some people make the mistake of looking at their IRA or their 401k or their retirement account as basically a savings account. And some people that may make sense, and I'm not going to talk about them right now, but for the vast majority of people, that doesn't make sense. Essentially, the money in your 401k or IRA or retirement account are your living expenses. It's not your emergency expenses. So anytime you experience an emergency in retirement, you don't want to have to go to your 401k and suddenly pull money out, which is fully taxed, to cover that emergency. So, first things first, when planning the countdown to retirement, I do have a conversation with the client to explain that emergencies will happen and we need to properly plan for those emergencies. So people always ask me, well, how much money do they need to have in their emergency fund? For retirees, I always say at least 6 months of living expenses. Now, sometimes people have that money in their savings account. They just always kept a lot of money in their savings account, and that money is ticking and purring along, and we can check that box, they're all done. Occasionally, I encounter people who do not have 6 months of living expenses. Maybe they just had a large emergency, or maybe they just never really kept an emergency account going. Then we have a conversation. So typically 3 to 5 years out is enough time prior to retirement for a person to start putting aside a certain amount of money every month to build up their savings. And I reiterate with the client that the savings is for emergencies. A vacation is not an emergency. A kitchen renovation is not emergency. Cosmetic surgery is not emergency. This is really if the bottom falls out of life and you need cash, the money is there. So, it could take some people, depending on their earning situation and their jobs, 3 to 5 years to save up 6 months of living expenses, not salary, living expenses, in order to prepare for retirement. So typically when we start talking about savings, I get the question, well, where should I put that money? And I always say a high yield savings account. And a high yield savings account will often give you a slightly or sometimes dramatically better rate of return than a traditional savings account. But there's high yield savings accounts with American Express, there's high yield savings accounts with Barclays, there's high yield savings accounts everywhere. And you have to do a little bit of comparison shopping to see which high yield savings account has the best rate of return for you. Now, when looking at high yield savings account, I do, sometimes people want to save money in CDs because CDs can offer a little bit more interest than a savings account. I often do not suggest putting money in CDs. And I can't tell you how many times a client has run into hot water. They had money in a high yield savings account, but it was in CDs. And I had to work with them to go through all sorts of processes to unwind that CD. They often ended up stuck with a pretty significant fee to unwind that CD early. So I do not suggest putting the money in a CD. High yield savings account that is liquid. Don't put it in CDs. and that you can access that money within 24 to 48 hours if necessary. Now, another thing that I talk about with savings and retirement, and this is actually a topic of discussion with millennials and Gen Zers because they just won't do this, is the necessity of keeping cash either in your wallet or at home or both. The reason why I say that, I live in San Francisco, which it's on a major earthquake fault. Eventually, the big one will hit, and if there is a major earthquake, no one's going to take your credit card, no one's going to take your debit card, no one is going to take a check. Everything is going to move in cash. A lot of people have never experienced a sequence of events like that, but people have never experienced a natural disaster where it's wide-scale destruction and you and your family have to get out. And you need to have enough money where you can put gas in the car, you can get water, for you and your family, and you can either get the hell out of there or you can throw some things in a backpack and hike out of there. And if you don't have any cash or any access to cash, you're going to have a big problem. Now, I always tell people, you want to keep cash in small denominations. Think ones, fives, tens, maybe 20s. No one's going to break a $100 bill in an emergency. And you also want to keep cash in your wallet or your purse or on you at all time. And that's in case there's a major earthquake or a natural disaster when you are outside the home and you need to get to a point of safety. You'll have some cash so you'll be able to maneuver or operate for a day or two to get out of that situation and to a point of safety. My baby boomers and silent generation clients totally understand that and totally are on board with that. Millennial and Gen Zers will not carry cash to save their lives. They can do everything digitally, but you may be in a situation completely unexpected, completely off guard, where cash is king, where credit cards, debit cards, checks just don't work. And people who do not have access to cash are really going to be stuck in a position. Some of my clients ask me about precious metals and gold. That's a tricky one because precious metals and gold, they're often difficult to access. There's controlled access to gold and precious metals. The value is not set. The value changes daily of an ounce of gold or an ounce of silver. Sometimes those metals can be very, very heavy. And if there is a natural disaster in San Francisco or somewhere else and you have, 1 ounce of gold, how are you going to chip off, a few grams of gold to pay for a tank of gas? It's not a currency that we regularly encounter and that people know how to deal with or how to evaluate. Hopefully, if there is a natural disaster in the area, the dollar is still the method of payment, and you will be able to use US dollars to get whatever you need, whether it's food, gas, water, or whatever, and get out of that situation. If we're in a situation where, the US doesn't exist anymore and the US dollar has no value, I think we have much bigger issues to be concerned about as humanity than what I'm talking about. You can use savings. Another thing that we often use savings for, you can use savings for low points in the market. A good example of this occurred in 2022, where it was just an absolute trash market. And for my clients that were newly retired due to sequence of returns, we really didn't want to touch their retirement account while 2022 was raging on, and we wanted to wait until the market recovered. Well, the clients that had savings were able to go into their savings account and take money out of their savings for expenses versus relying on their 401k, which was down 15% to start taking money out. So sometimes having 6 months or maybe a little bit more in emergency cash savings can act as a Band-Aid during a really bad moment in the market or a couple of bad moments in the market, where you can take money out of your cash reserves versus taking money out of your retirement account. I mentioned this before. I have to talk to people about what constitutes an emergency. Emergency fund is for emergencies only. It's not for trips. It's not for cosmetic surgery. It's not for kitchen renovations. It's not for new cars. It's really for when life deals you an unfair blow and you need to have some money to fix this situation ASAP. One thing I want to say about high yield savings account, as you open a high yield savings account at your preferred bank, make sure you add beneficiaries and contact people to the high yield savings account. Oftentimes I do a beneficiary check on my clients at least once a year, and high yield savings account are often the most neglected and forgotten accounts. And oftentimes these accounts have significant, like low six-figure amounts of money and have no transfer on death or no beneficiaries listed on the account. So, when you go through and do your annual planning or your annual checks on your account for beneficiary information, make sure you add a beneficiary and keep a beneficiary on the high yield savings account, and that beneficiary is accurate and up to date. Okay. Another thing, you want to make sure that savings are easily accessible. Some high yield savings account aren't actually linked to a bank so that you can access it immediately. It would take anywhere from 48 to 72 hours to get the money in the high yield savings account. This is problematic for a number of reasons. If you do have a high yield savings account with an organization that does not have any bank branches in your area, you may be able to put some of your money in a high yield savings account that doesn't have branch access in your area, but make sure you have some of your savings in a regular savings account at a bank that does have branches and access in your area. I have seen people go into situations where they really needed the money immediately and they just couldn't get it, and it created a very stressful and panicked situation. Had they just made sure that they could get easy access to the money in the high yield savings account, it would have been a much, much better experience. So there you have it, my take on savings and retirement. If you found this information useful, please like, please share, and please subscribe.